So Valerie, it is 9 o'clock. Phyllis, it's 9, and I think we've got the bulk of the people who will be joining us this morning. I
45.
apologize for not being on video. That's not morning this morning. Um, and but I just wanted to just, if I may, just briefly introduce sort of what's happening here, and then I'll hand the floor over to you. So, good morning, District 7080 presidents, co-presidents, treasurers, secretaries, and interested people in bylaws. Um, I'm glad that you're all able to join this morning. We're very fortunate to have Valerie Johnson and Phyllis Ingram join us this morning. They are helping us and our district understand the implications of the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act and some of the new rules that are coming in place. So this is one of several Zoom sessions that they'll be offering. We'll make sure that we get information out to you about the subsequent sessions as well as the subsequent activities that are part of this program. We are recording this session, so many of you let me know that there are other club members that want to know about this. So we'll make that recording available. I know some of you are joining in by phone, may not be able to see what's on screen. Please don't try to see what's on screen. And so we'll make sure we get the recording out to everyone in due course. So with that, I'm going to hand the floor over to Valerie and Phyllis for the better part of the hour. Yeah, we'll go from there.
And Phyllis, you're taking us off.
Yes, I am. So I am going to share my screen, and let me just go here. To do screen share. There we go. So can people see the presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Well, I really want to welcome you. We, as you may know, both Valerie and myself are from District 7010, which is Central and Northern Ontario. And so we have already gone through this process in our district, and we are delighted to be able to help facilitate it in your area and to help make it easier. So that's the goal here, is to sort of break it down for you and to help you understand and to help you move through the process quickly. Okay, so we're going to start with the disclaimer, because it's really important that you know that, you know, that this does not constitute, this is general information, doesn't constitute legal advice. You know, but given the complexity of the legislation, it's really important that you realize that not one solution is going to fit every club, and clubs are advised to consult a legal, you know, a lawyer or somebody legally attuned to this, and to make sure that all the I's are dotted and T's are crossed. And just to let you know, our new club, the Impact Club, just did this process, and that is exactly what we did. We did contact a lawyer right at the end, made it very quick and affordable, and made it a huge difference. So, and just us feeling comfortable moving forward. So I want to just begin with what our agenda is going to be. Obviously, we have a number of people here. I don't know that we'll have time for introductions because of the number of people on the call. Valerie, what do you say to that?
I think not. We've got a fair bit of material to cover, and not a whole lot of time to do it in.
Okay.
So
excellent. So we're going to share what ONCA is, why it is going to matter to your club. What do we need to know? What happens if you don't do anything, right? That's important. And where can you go for help? Okay, Valerie.
So this is me, and the question is, so what is this thing? You've probably heard of it colloquially referred to as ONCA, because the whole title is a mouthful. It's the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act 2010 SOC 15, for any of you who are interested in those kind of details. And Phyllis, next please. So what it is it's the legislation that governs all not-for-profit corporations in Ontario. It replaces Part 3 of the Corporations Act. So it used to be that not-for-profits were governed under a tiny section of a much larger piece of legislation. That's now changed. The interesting piece about all of this is that it was under development for 11 years. I think that's some sort of a record. And the reason it happened that way was because when the provincial government released the first draft, people in the not-for-profit sector, and I was very much involved at this point, looked at it and said, no, this simply won't work. And so that set the wheels in motion for an extensive period of consultation. Turns out 11 years in total. That was because elections came and went and other pieces of legislation came and went. And the not-for-profit sector ultimately declared that it was more or less comfortable with it, and the legislation was proclaimed on October 19th, 2021, and that's an important date for reasons I'll get into later. Yep, that's right, thank you. So what's different about it? Well, it's purpose-built for the not-for-profit sector. As I said, the previous legislation governed not-for-profits in a very tiny piece, about 7 pages of a much longer piece of legislation. And we were an afterthought, quite frankly. It didn't provide any kind of guidance at all about how not-for-profits should operate. But from my perspective, being a governance consultant, that was to some degree a good thing, because it meant that organizations needed to be trained about good governance from the perspective of best practices. Things have now changed in that ONCA provides detailed rules, about 111 pages worth, about how not-for-profit corporations have to operate in Ontario. The other thing it did was to move some of what are called mandatory provisions from bylaws to articles of incorporation. Those are the things that used to be called letters patent. So it's the process we'll talk about is focused primarily on amendments to bylaws, but it's important to remember that you also need to amend your articles of incorporation because some content has moved from one document to another. It created a new class of organization, and this is very important, perhaps more important in your district than it was in ours for reasons I'll get into. But this new class is called public benefit corporations. And the short version, much more complex than this, is that those are essentially charities or those that have charitable purposes. And the implications are pretty significant. So again, we'll get into that. It created the Ontario Business Registry, which Phyllis and I have found invaluable. It does 2 things. First of all, it allows not-for-profits to file all of the necessary government documents online and much streamlines that process. And it also allows people like Phyllis and me and other governance geeks to go in and find out just what corporations there are in Ontario. So there's a complete listing. And some of the data we'll be reporting on in just a moment comes from the Ontario Business Registry. It provided, when legislation was released, it also provided a standard organizational bylaw saying, if you do nothing, this is the bylaw that will apply. And whether or not that will work for you remains to be seen, but I've included later in the presentation some of the features of that standard organizational bylaw that may or may not work for you. And the other thing, if you're not already incorporated, but you decide to incorporate, is that it much simplifies that process. So, Phyllis, next, please. And this is you.
So why does it matter? You know, if your club is incorporated, this is the legislation that will govern the way you operate. And why that's important is that if you we're still operating under the previous, if you just continue as you are under your previous bylaws, then you will be automatically, you will be under the new standard bylaws that the province provides, and those may or may not work for you. And so to get in alignment and have your bylaws be effective and be the way you want them, and to be also in alignment with the Rotary sample bylaws as well, you know, you have until October 18th of this year. And you may not think that's very long away, but boy, it comes fast. And so it really is something where people need to get on board and start going through the process. And then obviously, if you club meets the criteria of the Public Benefits Corporation, you're going to have to fill out additional documents if you're over the 10,000, and we're going to talk about that a little later. If you're not already incorporated but decide to incorporate, you know, this is going to make the process a whole lot easier. And I must say, having just started a new Rotary Club in June, we went through this process using this bylaw builders, which you put in, you know, it'll ask you questions and you put in what you want, and it then pumps out a draft set of bylaws. So it's going to really help the process and make it so much easier for clubs. So, you know, so as you know, and this is one of the things I always talk about, you know, all Rotary clubs, when you charter, you have to follow the Rotary International bylaws. Then you have to follow your club charter and the club charter and constitution that you've agreed to with Rotary International. And then you have to look at Rotary International club bylaws. So most people sort of stick with that. They may make some adjustments, but what I want to just be able to highlight is the hierarchy of it all. So, you know, your bylaws have to be in alignment with the charter and the constitution. And then those have to be in alignment with the Rotary International bylaws, because we're a club under their incorporation. They have an incorporation in the United States. So if you're separately incorporated, then you've got extra that you have to be in alignment with. You have to be in alignment with the Ontario Not-for-Profits Act. And also, one of the things I wanted to talk about was, you know, the letters patent that many clubs, because they're incorporated, have, and that these will be changing to articles of incorporation. And what I want to share with you is what the difference of those are. I've done many articles of incorporation for organizations. I've incorporated a number of organizations. And the difference is, especially, is that now you have to put your classes of membership in that articles of incorporation. So that will be one of the major changes that takes place. So whether you have active members, honorary members, now if you're going to have corporate members and family memberships, you want to try and put those in your letters, your articles of incorporation, even if you're not using them yet, because you don't want to necessarily have to go back and pay for that and change your articles of incorporation. And then comes next your ONCA compliant bylaws. So that's the next step. And then the following is charities and charitable trusts. So though that gets a little bit more complicated, there's more that just needs to be considered if that's the case. But again, you will need that all of these things are in alignment. It's additions onto. So even your corporation, even under the ONCA compliant bylaws, needs to be in alignment with the Rotary International bylaws. So all of these things will work together, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. Is there anything else, Valerie, you want to add?
Yeah, if you could go back to that diagram for a moment, it might be useful for me to offer an example. So the club I'm a member of, which is the Rotary Club of Ravenhurst, is a chartered Rotary Club, obviously. So we're responsible for adhering to everything in the blue column. Because we're incorporated, we fall under the Ontario Not-for-Profit Corporations Act, and we have to amend our articles of incorporation and develop ONCA compliant bylaws. So that's everything in the orange column. And then we have an unincorporated charitable trust, which is how we manage our endowed funds. The charitable trust is governed by another piece of provincial legislation called the Trustees Act, and by what we've defined in our trust deed. So because of the way we're structured, we have to do all three of those. If you're not incorporated, you only have to do the blue stuff. If you're incorporated, but you don't have an additional charity in one form or other, you've got to do the blue and the orange stuff. Just wanted to make sure that was clear because it's critical, I think. Okay, Phyllis.
Perfect. Excellent. Back to you, Valerie.
Okay, so what do we need to do? And I've tried to make this as simple as possible. Phyllis, can you go to the next slide? Yeah, that's it, right? Got it? Everybody clear about all of that? If not, don't panic. We're here to break it down and to walk you through the process. And it's really, really not as bad as it looks. And this was a slide our club developed after we went through the process ourselves. We were flying blind and really had no clue what we were doing. We were probably first out of the gate in our district. And it was just stumbling through it that allowed us to put together this chart. So you guys are benefiting from the hours and hours of very painful work we went through, but this is essentially what the whole thing looks like. So Phyllis, next.
Okay.
So you might recall that many of you actually, we had 24 responses to that questionnaire that went out, a couple of weeks ago. It's still open as I understand it. Phyllis, is that right?
As far as I know, it is. Yep.
So we'd welcome more responses. So this is preliminary information, but from what the 24 of you told us, about 72% of clubs in your district haven't yet started the ONCA readiness process. So if you're feeling kind of behind the gun, not to worry, you've got lots of company. 23% were works in progress. So they'd undertaken the process but hadn't yet completed it. And 5%, which in this case is one club, said they were finished. So not to worry. As I said, you've got plenty of company and we're here to make it easier. Yep, next one. Okay. So we also asked, and we just wanted to give you some feedback about what you told us. This will all be wrapped up in a report, by the way. So when we asked who had responsibility for ensuring that your club became ONCA compliant, 42% said that it would be the board of directors. 33% said it would be designated members. And I found that really interesting because I think it's quite different from what we found in our own district and probably makes a lot of sense. So you guys are counting on people who have specific expertise to work through the process, which may very well be why some of you are with us today. And I think that does make sense. And in other cases, we've got board and designated members. We've got the foundation board, and I'll be talking more about that later. We've got the secretary, the president, and the governance committee. It appears that based on the responses we received, there's one governance committee in that number of clubs. So next up, Phyllis. Okay, so that ginormous chart I presented a couple of slides ago, this is step one. Excuse me. And that's to answer the question, does ONCA even apply to us? And to figure that out, you need to ask yourself two questions. Is your club incorporated? And if so, are you incorporated in Ontario? Now, what we found is that, one moment, what we found is that of the clubs who reported in the survey and of the research we later did, I think, Phyllis, there's only one club that's federally incorporated. Is that
Yes.
accurate?
Yes, there's one club that's federally incorporated. So that club will probably have already done their part because they went through the process federally. But I don't know, it was 2014, something like that. So it was done. So I'll just and I think they went federal after that, so they would have been totally updated.
Right. So if you're not incorporated, or you're incorporated but it's under federal legislation, then congratulations, you're done. If you're incorporated and you're incorporated in Ontario, then there's more work to do. Phyllis, next, please. So here's where things get interesting. When Phyllis and I went to the Ontario Business Registry, what we discovered is that 34 of the 46 clubs in your district, which accounts for, means about 74%, are in fact incorporated. Of those, 7 are listed as active, and 27 are listed as active, and 7 are listed as inactive. Now, what that means, the active corporations are those that have filed all of the necessary government filings, whose changes are up to date, etc. You can be listed as inactive for a number of different reasons. First, because you haven't done that filing, and so it's been so long since they've heard from you, they think, we don't know whether they're still active or not. In some cases, clubs might have themselves made a decision to make that corporation inactive because they've chosen other structures but want to put that one on the shelf for a while. So we can't tell what the status of we know what the status of the inactive clubs is, but we don't know why. So at any rate, 74% of the clubs in the district are incorporated. In addition to that, what we found is 22 separately incorporated foundations. So this is where clubs have decided that they won't incorporate the core club, but they will spin off a foundation to manage charitable donations. And there are 22 of them in your district. We were surprised, actually, because the profile is very different from what it is in our district. So I think the number of, or the percentage of incorporated clubs in 7010 is 91, Phyllis. Does that number ring a bell? 91% of clubs incorporated in our district? I think you're mute.
Actually, it was, yes, that sounds very, I think, because it was quite high. We had, most of our clubs were incorporated.
And we had very, very few separately incorporated foundations. So that changes the balance a little bit, and it probably means that we need to be having conversations with people from your foundations. I don't know whether any of you are present today or not, but if you're the corporate body, then this will apply to you. And as I said, we noted that 1 club is incorporated federally. So in total, what that means is that there are 56 Rotary corporations in the district, plus 12 unincorporated clubs, as best we can tell. And the other thing to take note of is that none of the Rotaract clubs are incorporated. And that's pretty consistent with the way it is across Ontario. To the best of my knowledge, there is only 1 incorporated Rotary club in the province, Rotaract club. So, okay, what's next, Phyllis? Step 2. So, if you're incorporated in Ontario, and so consequently the legislation applies to you, then the next question is, do the standard bylaws work for you? And you'll recall that I said when the legislation was passed, they also said, here is the standard bylaw that you can adopt if you want. Question, however, is, can you live with it? And in order to figure that out, you need to identify what are called mandatory, default, and non-mandatory provisions. That gets complicated, and I'm going to talk a little bit about it in the next slide. But what it means is that there are some things that you can't get out of no matter what. And there are some places where you've got some options, and you can make a decision about what your bylaws should say instead. So if the standard bylaws work for you, thanks. Then it's relatively simple. You adopt the standard bylaws and you have to go through a formal process to do that. You still have to revise your articles of incorporation, but it's a much more streamlined process than it otherwise would be. If they don't work, then you've got to develop new ONCA compliant bylaws and articles of incorporation. So next up, Phyllis. Okay, remember I said it was complicated? Here's why. So in the standard bylaws, there are 3 types of provisions. The mandatory provisions are just as they're outlined in the standard bylaw. Whether or not you like it, they're going to apply. You can say whatever you want in your own bylaws or articles of incorporation, and it doesn't matter. You can't override those mandatory provisions. Now, the good thing is that there are only about 6 of them, I think, but some of them are kind of tricky. One of the examples, and we'll be giving you a whole list of all of this, but just as an example, the maximum length of term for directors is defined as 4 years in the standard bylaw. Now, I suspect that that's okay for Rotary clubs. I don't know that there are any Rotary clubs that have terms of office longer than 4 years. For a lot of other not-for-profits, that might not be okay. So if you have terms of office that are 5 years, then by default, but rather you're rather required to make that change so that they're 4 years. Even if your even if your terms of office are 4 years or less, what you can do is you can, and this is what we did in our club, to say maximum length of term is 1 year. However, it's renewable for X number of terms. If we hadn't said that, then we'd have been stuck with what was detailed in the standard bylaw. So those kind of little tricky bits are important to understand. So that's the mandatory provisions. Default provisions, again, they're laid out in the standard bylaw, and they apply unless your governing documents say something else. So you can write your way out of these. And in our club, we did that because there was one of them we were really kind of allergic to. And that is that unless you say otherwise, directors don't need to be members of the corporation. So that raises the prospect of a board of directors of a Rotary club that's not comprised of Rotary members. And when we thought that through for about, a nanosecond, we decided we didn't want that. So what we could do, because that's a default provision, is we could write it into our bylaws that directors had to be members of the corporation, and that's what we did. So had it been mandatory, we wouldn't have been able to do that, but it wasn't. So we put something in our bylaws that was clear and specific about that because we didn't like that default provision. And then there's a group of bylaws called optional or non-mandatory or whatever. And the standard bylaw says nothing about that. And you can say whatever you choose. So for instance, we wrote in a provision that members can vote by mail, by telephone, or electronic means. So those are some examples. As I said, we have a list of all of the mandatory and default provisions in the legislation or in the standard bylaws that we'll be sharing with you. And this is probably the most difficult piece to wrap your head around and keep straight, but we'll have to go through that. Okay, Phyllis. So step 3, and you'll recall that I talked about public benefit corporations, and I'll give more details about that in a moment. But you need to figure out whether you are one. And that's a little challenging because public benefit corporations are registered charities and some non-charities that meet certain conditions. So again, I'll go into that in detail. If you aren't a public benefit corporation, then Congratulations, all done. If you are a public benefit corporation, then you need to revise and file your charitable docs in addition to all the other stuff. And on an ongoing basis, you're going to have to file an audit or something resembling an audit with the government. And at that point, you're done. So, Phyllis, I think we're ready to move on. So here's where we talk about public benefit corporations, and this language is directly from the legislation. So it's a charitable corporation or a non-charitable corporation that receives more than $10,000 per financial year in either donations or gifts from people who are members, directors, officers, employees of the corporation. So it's easy enough to figure out whether you're a charitable corporation. Are you a registered charity? If so, you're a public benefit corporation and you have to adhere to all of the rules that apply. The tricky piece is that if you're not a registered charity, but your club receives over $10,000 in donations or received over $10,000 in gifts or donations in the previous year, then you will be a public benefit corporation for that year. Now, I've spoken with a number of accountants about this whose heads are just exploding, because what it means is that you may have one status for 1 year and a different status for the next year. And again, it depends on how the $10,000 is calculated. And I'm still trying to get some clarity around that. But to do that, you really need to consult with an accountant who understands not-for-profits. So that's the bare definition of a public benefit corporation. And next. So the other resource that Phyllis and I consulted was the Charities Directorate, which is a branch of Canada Revenue Agency. And they have an online registry of all of the registered charities in Canada. So what we discovered was that 21 of the 46 Rotary clubs in District 7080, so about 46%, are registered charities. So the clubs themselves have registered as a charity through CRA. We also found an additional 27 registered charities that are affiliated with District 7080 clubs. And these are in the forms of foundations, community funds. I think we found one charitable trust. So again, this is very different from the profile in our own district. But what it means is that in a whole lot of cases, either clubs or foundations attached to Rotary clubs in your district are going to be called public benefit corporations. Next, Phyllis. Okay, so what about it? Well, there are a couple of things about public benefit corporations that means that they have to meet more stringent requirements than those that are not public benefit corporations. So the two categories: distribution of assets on dissolution of the corporation. There are rules about where your money can go if you dissolve the corporation. Now, we're not anticipating that that's going to happen at all, but you need to know, and it needs to be in your bylaws, that there are restrictions around that. And then the big one is financial review and reporting. So the rules vary depending on whether or not you're a charity, so a registered charity, and how much income you generate. By default, public benefit corporations should have an audit or review engagement. And review engagement, in my understanding, is that it's sort of like an audit light. So it's not as comprehensive as an audit, but nonetheless, it means an independent third party is taking a look at your financials for the year and declaring that it more or less represents reality. For more information about that, you'll see a URL at the bottom of the page, and that's Nonprofit Law, which is a project of Community Legal Education Ontario. And and they had information about the definition of public benefit corporations, because it really is quite complicated. Phyllis, next. Okay, so and you will be getting this presentation, by the way, so don't think that you have to commit all of this to memory, because it's a lot. So this is where I was saying that there are two sets of criteria. The first is whether you're a public benefit corporation or not, or whether you're a registered charity. Sorry, I keep meaning to change this slide. Whether you're a registered charity or whether you're not a registered charity. So if you're a registered charity and you have annual revenue of just under $100,000, you can pass an extraordinary resolution that says that you don't need to do an audit or a review engagement. If your income, your revenue is just under half $500,000, you can pass an extraordinary resolution to have a review engagement rather than an audit. If it's over $500,000, you must have an audit. That's if you're a registered charity. Now, those of you who have done audits or have had audits know that it's not a simple process and it's not an inexpensive one. So being able to do a review engagement rather than an audit could save you potentially thousands of dollars. But those are the stipulations. Now, if you're not a registered charity, but you are a public benefit corporation, and Phyllis, please remind me to change the title on this slide, and your revenue is under $100,000, you can get out of a review engagement or an audit completely. If it's under $500,000, you can again pass an extraordinary resolution that says you don't need to do either. And if it's over $500,000, you can have a review engagement rather than an audit if you're not a registered charity. So the important thing to remember is an extraordinary resolution means an affirmative vote by at least 80% of your members, and you have to have all members agree in writing. So it's a big deal. It's a much higher threshold than most corporate decisions, but necessary if you want to get out of either the audit or the review engagement requirement. As I said, this is a complicated bit of business, and I'd advise anybody who thinks they might be in this situation to have a discussion early on with their accountant, who may actually refer you to another accountant who does not-for-profit work regularly, because as I understand it from the conversations I've had, there are some fine points here that I certainly can't capture, and you'll need advice about. Okay, Phyllis.
Okay, it's still you, Valerie, from what I see.
No, I think.
Oh, okay. What if we do nothing?
Yeah. Okay, so if we do nothing, it gets done for you. Any not-for-profit that hasn't amended its bylaws to comply with the new legislation by October 18th of this year will be deemed to have adopted the standard organizational bylaw, which may or may not reflect the way you want your club to operate. Remember I said way back in the beginning that legislation was passed on October 19th, 2021. And when it was passed, the government gave not-for-profits 3 years to comply, which makes it October 18th of this year. So I think that's it for me, Phyllis.
Okay, so we're just going to look at our governing documents. Again, what's great about this slide just shows you, the level of detail in each of these documents. So again, your articles of incorporation, basically I would describe as your skeleton, right? So there's not a lot there, but that, like I said, that other piece that is there that that's going to be different from letters patent is going to be your membership classes and their voting. That's important. Then obviously your bylaws build onto that. And some people put a ton of stuff in their bylaws, and some people make them more, they're much more just sort of muscle on that bone. And so it is up to your club how you want to handle it. But like Valerie said, there are some things that are going to be mandatory, that are going to be required, that you have to have in there anyway. Some things that are going to be optional, and then some things you're going to be very flexible on. So you'll be able to look at that. And then the last piece is your policies and procedures. And then you can look at what I think here's the one area that a sweet spot, I think, for you is you can look at your policies and procedures you have now. And for the most part, probably a lot of them are going to be fine, right? So you're not going to, you just need to double check that they're in alignment, but for most people, they're going to be fine. And that'll make it much easier, but that's where usually the bulk of it is. And then we looked at the level of difficulty to change something, right? So your policies and procedures can be just done, which was for me was a little different. The option is it could be just done by the board. We didn't put that in our bylaws because we wanted to have 50% of the membership agree to it, but that's our club, but that is a possibility. Bylaws, I believe, can be passed by 50% of the membership. We're used to having them as 2/3 of the membership bylaws, but usually there's a level of difficulty to change in your articles of incorporation. Again, those are, I believe, your 2/3 to change. But I don't have that number right at hand. So again, articles of incorporation were previously called letters patent. They will be called articles of incorporation, and that is the level of difficulty in terms of changing. So again, what's in them. So your articles, your governing documents will be just your organizational name and your location, number of directors, and they'll have the information about who your directors are, and classes of membership. Bylaws here, as you can see, it's really, what are those conditions of membership, the roles, responsibilities. They're actually fairly minimal in the actual document. That's, but what's the word, not spit out, but anyway, thrown out by once you input the information anyway. But it does talk about election process and terms of office, officers and responsibilities, and meeting procedures, all those kind of regular things that are normally in bylaws. You can read it there. And then, your policies and procedures is how you handle your operational issues. And they're not required by ONCA, but obviously they make a difference to your club. One of the things that I just want to talk about quickly, and I'm not sure that it's in here. We have a process that I've been using and we've been implementing in District 7010 with a number of clubs. And it is way we get away from Robert's Rules of Order, and it's called consultation. And it's a 1-page document that is a really fabulous tool to be able to use for meetings, for any meeting, and within, whether it's a subcommittee, committee, board, whatever, in how people operate and talk to each other and whatever. And I'm going to share that document with you as well. Valerie, did you have something you wanted to share?
Yeah, Phyllis, can you go back to the previous slide? Just one point I want to make. So we put this in here to help people figure out how much detail to put in each of those kinds of documents. Typically, there's way more detail in policies and procedures than there is in bylaws, and way more detail in bylaws than there is in articles of incorporation. And that's because, to some degree, that they're difficult to change in the reverse order. So when you're thinking about how much detail to put in, remember that if you put something in the Articles of Incorporation, you're going to have to go through a fairly complex process in order to change it. A less complex process for the bylaws and less still for policies and procedures. But I think it's important that that's an important decision-making tool when you're thinking about, okay, so how complicated do we want these to be? Except, of course, as Phyllis said, for the things that are mandatory in the bylaws where you have no choice.
And also I want to share with you that the bylaws for our new club, we will make available. We're still in the just in the process of finalizing them, but that should be done within a week or so. And which would be nice because you'll have all the headers, because the one challenge is when a bylaw builder spits out the your answers, they do it in a formed question as opposed to a header, and it's like you have to go through the whole thing. So it might be easier to, and also just in the formatting, their formatting's a little off, so it makes it a little challenging. But I mean, the essence is there. So but we will again try and help you with as many tools as we can to make your life easier. So so that brings us to where we can help. And Valerie, you're going to speak to that.
So if this is your first introduction to ONCA, you're probably feeling like your head's going to explode. I know I did when I first found out about it. And I continue to feel that for quite some time until we developed a process that's a whole lot easier and found some resources to help us through it. So in general, I mentioned that the not-for-profit sector was very much engaged in revising the first kind of disastrous draft that came out of government. And the group that was most involved was the Ontario Nonprofit Network. There's information on ONN, and the link is there, that describes how it all happened, what the history was, etc. So if you're one of those people who needs to understand context, that's the place to find it. If you're one of these ridiculously detailed oriented policy wonk types, and you want to see the legislation itself, that's where to get it. It's the Ontario e-laws site, and that's the direct link. I checked yesterday, and these links are still live. There's parts of this presentation were developed a while ago, but these are still live. And for really detailed information about the changes that ONCA requires, there's a law firm called Carter's that is a not-for-profit and charity law specialist. And they do semi-annual, that's twice a year, right? I can never get that straight. Semi-annual webinars on various aspects of charity and not-for-profit law for about 2 years, including the one last spring. There was a heavy emphasis on ONCA because not-for-profits were scrambling, trying to get compliant. And the recording include, well, I don't know whether the recording is there, but certainly all of the presentations from the spring 2023 webinar are available at that site. And they are invaluable. I've been attending Carter's webinars now for probably 2 or 3 years. And for about $25, it's the best education you'll ever get about stuff like this. And these are top lawyers in the field who obviously can't answer specific questions about your own situation, but they provide really good basic education about what's required. Next, Phyllis. Okay, so this is a sample of what's available on the ONN, Ontario Nonprofit Network website. And if you're looking for information about broader governance issues, it's not a bad place to start. As I said, ONN is very well recognized in the field. They don't typically deal with service clubs, and so there needs to be some translation. But they're what they contain in terms of nonprofit governance general is really exceptional. And next. Okay, so here's where things get really concrete. When the legislation was introduced and it became clear that nonprofits were going to need a whole lot of help figuring out how to comply. Can you go? Yeah.
Yep, sorry.
That's okay. The provincial government funded Community Legal Education Ontario, and that's a branch of Legal Aid Ontario, to develop a program called Nonprofit Law Ontario. And you'll see that first URL has links to general information about what nonprofit, about all the resources available through Nonprofit Law Ontario. And the really important piece is Bylaw Builder. So Bylaw Builder is an online tool that asks a series of questions about how you want your organization to operate. Based on, and then there's multiple choice, and you can write in if you want to do something completely different. The really useful thing about this is that it doesn't allow you to write in something different for a mandatory provision where you don't have any option anyways. So you sit down, in our case, there were 5 of us, I guess, the governance committee, that sat down with Bylaw Builder for, I think it took in total about 4 hours. And Phyllis, how did you guys do it?
Oh, that we did it. It was about a 4-hour process. We did the first 2. Yeah, we did it in 2 parts, and we actually videoed it. We recorded it, so that is available too as well. So you can see us going through the process and how it works. Right, gives people a sense of the discussion that we had about certain questions. One, like, just to give you an example of one that was challenging for us, because we're a new club, we have like 21 members, under the requirements that are, you can only have 5%, how does it go? In terms of being able to call a meeting, a general members meeting, and the highest number you could do is 5%. You can go lower at 1%, but when you only have, say, we'll say for round numbers, 20 people, that means that basically one person can call a general members meeting, which is a bit problematic, but we don't have any choice about it. So that was just something that there was quite the discussion on. So it just gives you an idea.
So as I said, the way it works is that you sit down with whoever in your club is interested and skilled in these things, and you answer the questions that Bylaw Builder poses. And as Phyllis pointed out, very often there's a whole lot of discussion required because you've got to make a decision about how you want to operate going forward. And so once you've done that, you move on to the next question. The software saves, or rather the system saves your answer, and then you move on to the next question. I can't remember offhand how many there are in total, but probably, Phyllis, what's a ballpark?
I'm not sure, but I remember we had a list. Remember, you created a list, and we had a list of them. So that, again, that's another resource, and
Yes.
so that we can help you with. So you'll have a general idea of the questions before you even get on there. But what's great about this is that when you do your progress, if you had to stop, which we did, we stopped and went back another day, the information's there and saved, but always double check, right? Before you leave it, double check that you can get back into it. Because one time we did lose it. But anyway, but I was able to go back in and do it very quickly because we already had the discussion, so I knew the answers.
Right. So as I said, you work through this process, the system saves your answers, and when you're finished, it spits out a set of what they refer to as bylaws that bear no resemblance to bylaws to me, because it includes, as Phyllis said, the questions that got you there. And there is some work required to do the formatting properly so that they look like bylaws you can work from. But once that's done, then you can review them. You can look at them and say, oh, well, we answered X to this question, but what were we thinking? That's not going to work. Or we answered A to this question and B to this question, and they contradict each other. So how do we reconcile that? But Bylaw Builder gives you a really valuable place to kickstart the process. And having done many of these, I can tell you it comes together in much less time than it otherwise would. So that's, if you're interested, can you go back to just 1 minute, Phyllis? So if you're interested in using this process, I highly recommend it. We found it very useful. I don't want to oversell it in that it's not that you can just go through it and then you're done. There is some work to do at the very end. And what we recommend is that once you've completed the first draft of your bylaws, or what you think is the final version of your bylaws, it's not a bad idea to have the legal review. So we've been asked a number of times in our own district why they shouldn't just take it to a lawyer to start with and say, here, you develop our bylaws. And my response to that is twofold. First of all, because no lawyer really, without a whole lot of discussion, can understand how you want your club to operate. And because it's going to cost you a lot of money if you do it that way. However, legal review at the end would mean that whoever the lawyer is reviewing something that's already done and can say, well, yeah, from a legal point of view, this one won't hold. And so that needs to be changed. But they're not starting from scratch, which I think is a little less problematic from a variety of reasons. So this is what Bylaw Builder looks like. And I'm going to come in so I can see what this says. Here's an example. So, do you want all your directors to come up for re-election in the same year, in different years, or some other way? And so the options there are all at once, on a staggered basis, write my own bylaw, or don't say anything about it in the bylaws. And that, the last option is because you're not required to. So the really important thing about this is that Bylaw Builder was developed in the context of the new legislation. So it doesn't allow you to do anything that the legislation doesn't allow you to do, unless you override it completely, in which case you're on your own. And then you can see it works through, that's under the second category, board of directors, and then it works through how you want your officers to be selected and any number of other things. So next one, Phyllis. And then there's us. So yes, as Sandhya said, we've been working to do a number of things, develop an inventory, which we've got done in draft, which we now have to clarify because we're seeing some things where there are some discrepancies. But the inventory will let the district and all of you know how many of you are incorporated and how many aren't, how many active versus inactive corporations there are, how many public benefit corporations or non-public benefit corporations. That one's a little tricky, as I said, because of the definition. We're also going to be developing a list of how many foundations and other registered charities. That information is going to have to be validated, and we're in the process of doing that now. We've already asked you in the questionnaire about the current status of ONCA compliance, and we're conducting these Zoom meetings, and we will develop or be using resources we've already developed to support clubs in becoming ONCA compliant. And just off the top of my head, the two I can think about are the list of mandatory and default provisions. And Phyllis, you were talking about something else.
Yeah.
The e-club bylaws, which will be tremendously valuable, I think. Now, that's not to say that you have to say the same things in your bylaws, but you'll see the structure, you'll see the kinds of content, and you can make a decision on your own what you want yours to look like.
And if
So,
people would like to stay just a slight bit longer, for those who would like to stay, I'll show you the copy of our bylaw builder, what it spit out, the first thing. And I'll show you what our bylaws just visually look like now, just to give you a sense of what those differences are. Also on the rotaryimpact.ca website, rotaryimpact.ca, you will find that's where we housed our district, all the stuff we did for District 7010. There's a page there, it says ONCA, and you're more than welcome to visit that and to look at any of those resources as well, which is a lot of the same links that are here are on there, so that we posted.
and I'm seeing something in the chat from somebody who said, thank you so much for doing this. It's super helpful, however, a little intimidating. And if that's what you're feeling, we feel your pain because this is where we were not so very long ago. But finding Bylaw Builder was truly revolutionary and made life so much easier, even for those of us like Phyllis and I who've done this stuff before. But it's a remarkable tool that we'd certainly recommend you all take advantage of. So I think that's it, but we have a little time for questions.
Some questions, and I'm just going to find out those documents, and then I'll just do a screenshot of them. So, but we can still take questions while we're doing that.
I see a hand up.
Yes, I'm just need a little bit more clarification. My club is one of those that has a foundation. The foundation was developed according to the CRA regulations and allows us to offer tax receipts. But the rules are that it has to be a very separate entity from the club itself. From what I saw in your PowerPoint is, if our club has this has an associated foundation, are we then automatically a public benefit club ourselves?
Yeah, my understanding of it, and as I said, the profile in your district is so different from the one in ours. We didn't deal with this, so I apologize. I don't have this answer at my fingertips. But my understanding is that if your foundation is incorporated, then your foundation is the public benefit corporation. That is the foundation incorporated? Because we found a couple that we don't think are, which we're trying to wrap our heads around.
I believe our foundation has its own letters patent.
Okay, in which case, as I understand it, the foundation would be a public benefit corporation, but the club wouldn't. I don't think, but certainly you're going to need the advice of an accountant on that.
So if that is the case, then that simplifies it quite a bit for the club itself.
It does. It does. And now your foundation has a separate board.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think, and unless you're on the board of the foundation, you might be able to say, over to you. But I'm not entirely clear about that.
But I'm also from the same club, but I will say that the club does raise over $10,000 from the public, and that automatically makes us
right.
Right. We meet that $10,000 threshold, so it doesn't matter. If we weren't doing any fundraising in the club and all the fundraising was through the foundation, then the club would be fine. But because we do the fundraising in the club, that's where the issue is going to come in.
That's my understanding of it. As I said, you might want to talk to an accountant about that, because when last I had that conversation, and I was at a lunch with two accountants who were, let's say, not entirely in agreement about how the $10,000 is calculated. So that's the piece here. I certainly, as somebody who is not an accountant, I don't understand. but I think you'd be well advised just to pose that question to your own accountant.
Thank you.
Okay,
And
Can I go ahead with?
where are we, Phyllis?
oh, well, you keep talking, you can keep talking.
Okay.
I'm just sharing what it spit out the first time before us, and we did some edits on this. But people can look at this and you can talk at the same time.
Okay, so I'm seeing, I thought Ingrid had a question.
Yes, I did. It was also about the $10,000, so we'll take that one offline. But I also wondered what's involved in converting your letters patent to articles of incorporation?
That's not it. Well, they have to be filed ultimately, but the process itself isn't complex. What you need to bear in mind is that there are certain provisions that are now required in the articles of incorporation that weren't required in letters patent. So my experience with letters patent, many of which were written decades and decades ago, is that they tend to be very spare. And the provincial government is now requiring that they include details about, and Phyllis, help me because I can't remember off the top of my head, the number of directors.
Yes, and their information, the location of, it's just your basic information, your legal name, your what do you call it, your actual location, and your directors, information about your directors, number of directors, and also, like I said, that really unique piece is about your classes of membership and what are the voting rights of those classes. And it also does, you know, what are you going to do if you for dissolution, if you think so. I'll look that. We should be able to actually maybe use one of our clubs maybe as an example. Our e-club, the only challenge we had, we did the ONCA bylaws, and then we realized, oh my God, we actually have to incorporate federally because 3 of our clubs are in Quebec. So we, after we did all this work, we actually had to do that, but we were able to use and massage a lot of that stuff. So actually what I thought I'll do, instead of showing this, I'm just going to put it as an attachment, these here, what we've done. And so you can just take a look at it at your convenience. You can just download it from here. I'll like
So
going.
just to be very clear about what this is what comes out the other end of Bylaw Builder once you've answered all the questions.
Yeah, they're answered in questions.
Yeah.
And and that looks really easy to cut and paste off. This wasn't so easy. So
No,
but we did get it to roll, and we got a nice set of clean bylaws. The one thing on these bylaws that we would add is around the bylaws that I'm sending you as a template is just about conflict resolution. How would you handle conflict resolution? I think that needs to be in the bylaws. So as we update our bylaws, that will be added to it. So just for you to know. Okay. And also we may put more in about which officers when we're talking about our board of directors. So those are 2 things that our club just discussed that we would add to the set of bylaws, but I will share them with you, and it'll give you something to at least look at. And
so Phyllis, what you just said reminded me of the slide you folks might remember on articles of incorporation versus bylaws versus policies and procedures. So in Phyllis's case, they're saying they want something in their bylaws about the process for conflict resolution. In other situations, what might happen is that they would say in the bylaws, conflict resolution to be addressed through the policy and procedure as defined from time to time by the board of directors or something like that. And then there would be a policy developed that had the very specific details about what constitutes a conflict of interest, or no, we're not talking conflict of interest, that's me. What constitutes a conflict and how it needs to be managed. So it's the reference in the bylaws and then the more detailed information in the policies and procedures. That was just one example of that kind of thing. Louise.
I think Mahendra's before me.
Yeah, I
Yes,
just
Mahendra.
put a question on the chat box, but I'll repeat here. I'm with the Rotary Club of Walkville, and the club itself, it's not incorporated. However, we have two incorporated entities. One is a charitable trust, and the other one is a foundation. So in such a case, would we still need to incorporate?
So
Or is there any benefit of incorporating versus not incorporating, as a club, because the club functions mainly as an administration,
Yeah.
as an administration function, it's, in the club,
So the decision to incorporate or not depends on any number of things. First of all, I mean, what incorporation will do is that in some cases it will give you more formal standing if you need to transact any business or make a point, and this is more for service delivery agencies, but they can, if not incorporated, then be treated with less respect than otherwise they would be. Incorporation also provides a legal cushion of reduces the liability for individual directors. But much depends on what else you've got. Now, did you say that you have an incorporated foundation?
We have a foundation and a charitable fund, but both are federally incorporated.
Right.
And so which are subject to audit, etc. And we have separate boards for each one of them.
Yeah.
Whereas the club itself is just for carrying out the club activities, like for example, collecting and paying dues out, as well as let's say for dinner receipts and dinner payments.
Right.
And,
so I guess
and other incidental expenses relating to club activities, not necessarily charitable activities, because those are conducted separately.
Yeah, so I guess the question would be, is there anything you've been unable to do because you're not incorporated?
I think we've been operating it as an unincorporated organization for quite a while, the club itself. So, personally, I don't see any additional benefit for incorporating.
Yeah, and there may not be an advantage,
No.
except for the release from liability. And that's something you need to talk to a lawyer about. And I should have said this in the beginning, by the way. I'm not a lawyer. And the reason Phyllis and I said right up front was that, you need ultimately, it's not legal advice.
Absolutely, I agree. I understand, because I think if this is something that came up during your discussions elsewhere,
Yeah, and there are two kinds of people typically who deal with this stuff. One is lawyers and the other is governance consultants, and that would be us. Yeah. So we came to these roles from years and years of working with not-for-profits and doing this kind of work in many different contexts. Yeah. But ultimately, in order to ensure that you're protected to the degree you need to be, that's why we're advising legal consultation.
So the short answer, I suppose, but we still have to check with our lawyers, is we can still continue as an unincorporated corporation, given that, our charitable activities are all conducted out of incorporated entities.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's a short answer, I mean, if we are not really mandated or required to be incorporated, it's a choice for us to.
And you're still under the incorporation of Rotary International. You're a club of, and you do pay insurance fees. As your club, you're covered under the district of your district.
District, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, but those are, if I understand correctly, for conducting charitable activities, with the public, that's where the liability, insurance liability comes into play,
Yeah.
Louise?
The Rotary activity itself, the members' activities, I don't think that's is covered, under the insurance.
Could move on and give Louise the floor.
Yeah,
Sure.
okay. Thank you. My question is around our foundation. So our letters patent are from 1967, and they are very generic and they are very unusual, and we don't want to touch that because it allows us to do so much more than what some more current corporations would be under. But with this new legislation, does that just negate that whole letters patent and changes it? Or if we start messing with the letters patent, it's going to change it?
In order to be, Phyllis, why don't you take this one?
Oh, okay, so yeah, so yes, so it does change. So as of like you said, no, what is it, November 18th? There will be an impact, and so you do have to change from letters patent to articles of incorporation. And there will be, like you said, all your bylaws will be null and void. And unless you update them, and you update from letters patent to articles of incorporation. So you have to, I hope that's answering your question.
So if we choose to be the club that does nothing, because I put this question in the chat, what's my penalty then?
There is none. And nothing, the world doesn't come to an end on October 19th. You don't all turn into pumpkins. But should anything happen, the board, for instance, relies on the old bylaws to make a decision, and that decision is inconsistent with what's in the standard operational bylaw, then, and if you're called upon to defend the decision, then you got nothing. You can't defend a decision that's inconsistent with the new standard organizational bylaw.
Or the act, yeah, so after the act, in the end, it's the act. The standard bylaws that they provide is based on the act. But even if you create bylaws and they're not in alignment with the act, which is similar to the old, right? They have to be, the act always takes priority. Your articles are top. And in fact, that's one of the things I think we missed in there. The act is the second. You have to follow the act. The bylaws fall from the act, and they have to be in alignment, just the same as your policies and procedures have to be in alignment with your bylaws and the act. So everything falls from one. It's like that situation.
And so just to be clear, if we as a club chose to ignore it completely from a foundation perspective and go on for 10, 15 years and nothing happens, who cares? But if there's a situation, then that's when we get into trouble, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, I missed a hand up from Dufferin Aaron Caledon. Yes.
Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute.
No, still
Sorry
mute.
about that. Sorry about that. Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. That was excellent. Our club is not incorporated. We are giving some thought to perhaps becoming incorporated. But just around the $10,000 threshold to become a public benefit corporation, if we're not incorporated at all, then I'm assuming that $10,000 threshold does not apply.
If you're not incorporated, then you're not subject to the legislation. So I don't see how you could be subject to the definition of public benefit corporation.
Okay, thank you. So, but a sort of follow-up question: how are donations defined? Does that include fundraising? Sponsorship?
Yeah. Remember I said I had that lunch with the two accountants who couldn't agree on something really fundamental? That was it.
That was it. Okay.
Right. And yeah, that's the thing. And do we have any accountants with us this morning? Oh. Yes. Okay. Wisdom, please.
Generally, the definition is what you intake, through the charitable activities that you conduct, fundraising. For example, if you're doing a golf tournament, you have sponsorship from corporations. You charge pay fees, green fees to the members and dinners, etc. So what you collect from that is kind of considered to be revenue for the definition that you're looking for. Another thing would be, let's say if you're doing a bingo or you're doing a lottery, that's another, whatever you derive from the public, at large, is considered to be, would fall under this definition.
Okay.
And
Thank
the
you.
question then is whether you do on a gross basis or net basis, where, when you have expenses, in terms of raising funds, whether, you have to, report the gross, that's a subject to debate, but it's the kind of activities that you conduct would fall, define, what you're looking for.
Just one comment, Valerie, just a point that came up, is that if you aren't incorporated, but you have a foundation that's where your fundraising arm is, or charitable, that you will still be responsible to update on that. So just to be clear on that part.
Sandhya.
Hi. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in on two things, right? So just to feed off Phyllis's comment, yeah, I know that, we put a lot of emphasis on clubs, but if you have other associated entities like a foundation, like this still applies to you. It doesn't just center around your club, and I hope that that's clear to everyone. So foundations or other incorporated entities, those are impacted. Even if your club is not. And so you may have to update things there. The other thing is around compliance. So Louise, to your point, Phyllis and Valerie have answered what happens if you do nothing. I also want to add that the district is offering this as a support and service. I'm not taking attendance, sitting here going who participated, who didn't. We're not going to follow up on whether you decide to take action or not. We hope that you will do what's right for your club, but the district does not have a governance nor, they don't have a governance or monitoring responsibility in this process, right? So this is really, all of this will be offered, and Louise, great point around the website. We'll think about offering, the page for support materials, but we're not going to be checking in or making sure that everything is in order.
Okay, thank you, Sandhya.
Can I just respond to Sandhya? Thank you. And I just want everybody to know that our plan is not to not do something.
Yeah.
That is not the four-way test. Yeah, but we will definitely be doing something and figuring out how to be thoughtful. Thank you.
Yeah, no, and it was less to that point, but I know that many have let me know that they're participating, or they want to let me know how they're doing. I just need to let everyone know that I'm glad everyone is taking an active role. We're not keeping a checklist here, though. Right?
And I think, Phyllis, we've got time maybe for one more question.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Ingrid.
Thank you. I just wondered, has there been any issue at all with the new bylaws for Ontario clubs being different from the Rotary Standard Club Constitution and bylaws?
That is one of the other resources we developed. So Phyllis and I have a sheet that contrasts the requirements of Rotary International for club bylaws with the requirements under ONCA. And I am thrilled to say there's no contradiction between the two.
Oh, great.
This is something we didn't do until very late in the process, and it was one of those, oh my God, what if we find that there is some inconsistency? But what I can say is that the RI recommended bylaws for clubs are much, much briefer. There are far fewer provisions, whereas the ONCA bylaws are way, way more complex. But when we put them side by side, we discovered that there weren't any glaring inconsistencies. So
That's a big relief.
It was for us too, let me tell you.
Thank you.
And we do have one last question. I think we can take it.
Excuse me.
Karen?
Yeah. So I'm little confused about this articles of incorporation. Is it a specific form that we have to fill it, or because my club doesn't have a see the letter patents? So
Yeah.
Phyllis, can you
There's-
take that?
Yeah, there's a specific form to be filled out, and we'll see if we can find that link and give you the link for the form.
that will be very nice. Thank you.
I do want to share, you guys are getting the benefit of a whole lot of hours that we did from our district that were pretty brutal. And so you should be able to hopefully fast track through this to some degree. And just like I said, we're just really grateful to be able to come here and be able to assist in any way. You know, Valerie's got incredible specialization around governance and organizational leadership, especially around charitable. And mine is, I've set up, incorporated a number of organizations, and my specialty is around all the governance piece, but also around membership and how all that ties together. So if we can be of service, that's, you know, where we are at.
Thank you so much.
Oh, you're on mute, Valerie.
Just a final point. It was entirely coincidental that Phyllis's Impact Club was in the state of development it was when we were trying to work through this, because they very graciously agreed to be guinea pigs, and we got to watch them go through the entire process. And you'll get to do that too when we share the recordings with you. So it's, to our mind, that was a really central piece of this, because you got to watch it live in action. And we heard all of the discussions, all of the, well, maybe not, and all of the, well, no, I don't think so. What are you talking about? And it was the most useful piece of this whole thing, I think. So thank you, Phyllis.
Yep, and those links are available on, like you said, the rotary-impact.ca, the actual videos, recordings of us doing it, so you can actually look at us doing it, so.
Yeah.
And so I think we're at the end, and I want to just thank everybody. This was a wonderful morning. I think this doing it on a Saturday morning when people were, you know, a little bit more bright-eyed and you know, able to kind of comprehend the information, because I know there's a lot of information, but Valerie and I are thrilled that we were able to be part of this. We're just hopeful that it makes a difference in your district, and that we will see you again on some of these other presentations or recordings that we're going to do.